Peace, family. Y'all know who it is. It's Bakari Lumumba, back once again, the progenitor of LumumbaSpeaks.com, a Black empowerment initiative where we believe we could gain a competitive advantage by always betting on Black. Back with another video. Before we get started, make sure you hit the subscribe and the like button as well as the notification bell so you're not ghost watching, all right? So we're back once again, and we're going to have a conversation due to the proliferation and rise in school shootings and mass shootings here in America. We know that unfortunately, school shootings tend to be an American phenomenon due to what, as many would argue, Americans' infatuation with guns. However, we do know this is linked, of course, to the Second Amendment. Many people would argue that this is a white people's infatuation with guns. As we do know, 70%, 75% of our mass shootings and, of course, school shootings, the perpetrators are, of course, white. However, with that being said, if you go to certain parts of the South, even out west, you find individuals of other ethnic backgrounds who engage in gun ownership at a rate that rivals, of course, their white counterparts. So we're talking about African Americans in the South, and of course, Latinos in the Southwest, in the West, on the West Coast. So this is something to be cognizant of, right? So, but I wanted to have this conversation because there were some individuals at the gym I was going to. As you all know, I'm trying to keep it tight. I'm keep my body by the Moomba suit on Batman going. And there were some conversations around a need to change gun laws. And so, of course, I was vehemently opposed to that for a number of reasons that we'll get into. Number one, I also have to, in full disclosure, share that I, of course, am a licensed gun owner. So I practice my Second Amendment right. I am an avid gun collector. So it would be rather disingenuous of me to advocate for something that I don't actually believe in. So we're going to get into it. But I think the number one issue that we have to look at when we talk about gun violence in America, particularly mass shootings, is that America is a nation that was born out of the crucible of violence, right? And that violence, of course, started with Norman Yoke, Manifest Destiny, and the eradication and removal and genocide of people who we now call Native Americans, right? We have to be cognizant of that. It also is linked to the enslavement and dehumanization of Black people who are Africans who were brought here, not only to the Western world, but even also particularly to America during the Holocaust of enslavement, known as chattel slavery. Have to be cognizant of that. We also know that historically in this country, disputes are solved, have been solved through violence, because this is the country that believes in what might is right, not morality, but might is right. So I think we have to be cognizant of that. Second, I personally don't think that changing the gun laws will solve much. And I'm gonna tell you why. If a person wants to engage in criminal activity, nefarious acts with the use of a firearm, if they can't get their hands on a firearm legally, they simply would turn to the street and get one illegally. If you don't believe me, look at some of the major cities in this country, such as Philadelphia, Chicago, New York City, in which this takes place. These individuals who are committing these atrocious acts of violence, like what took place in Texas, and we know we want to give some positive energy and well wishes to people down there who have to deal with the unfortunate news that they've lost their loved one, lost their child, that they sent out into the school to learn and hopefully prepare for a productive future, and you have something like this happen. So we definitely want to make sure that our concern and our care is placed with our community there. I don't think anyone ever would want to learn after sending their child out that, they're not going to come home because someone has snatched their life from them really before it's even begun. So really want to send my condolences out there. But with that being said, I think these are things that we need to be cognizant of. Secondly, when we look at the Second Amendment, right? We have a Second Amendment right to bear arms. If you try to take that Second Amendment right away, I think there'll be some issues. Even if it was ratified or amended, I think there would be, or modified, it would be amended, I think there would be an issue. For example, I had a conversation, some individuals say, well, why can't they put a cap on the amount of rounds that you could purchase? And I said, well, the question then would be, if they could put a cap on the amount of rounds that you could purchase, what else could they put a cap on? Could they put a cap on the amount of clothing you could buy, the amount of groceries you can buy, the amount of stocks that you can acquire, right? And so many people would argue that it's becoming a socialist, totalitarian state. That would be an issue. Moreover, the conversation then moved towards, this is a conversation I'm having with people, well, we need to change the laws. One of the brothers said, great brother, I admire him very much. He said, well, you should have to show your ID when you purchase a firearm. Well, here's the reality. Anyone who's purchased a firearm knows legally you have to show your ID every single time. So, well, you should have to fill out a questionnaire. You have to fill out a questionnaire every single time. Some of those questions are, have you ever denounced your American citizenship? They're not going to sell a weapon to someone that is perceived by the government as an enemy of the state. That would be nonsensical on the government's part. Do you have any mental health issues? Do you have any felonies? Any crimes against a household member? All of these things are on a questionnaire. Now, people could be dishonest, but guess what? Before you buy the firearm, they have to run your information with your social into a federal database. Oftentimes, it'll come right back, okay, he's cleared, or guess what? 3 to 5 business days you have to wait. So there are already guidelines in place. As I stated before, the mass shooting that took place in my hometown, shout out to the Gym City, West Dayton Strong, Dayton, Ohio, 937 Stand Up. The individual wasn't able to acquire firearms legally, so he had someone else purchase them for him. Also, if you go into a gun store, they have signs plastered throughout the store. Buying a firearm for someone else is a federal crime. 10 years in prison, it's all over there. So all I'm saying is that if a person is a criminal, they're going to find ways to engage in the criminal acts outside of the purview of the law, right? A good example would be through the 1920s, you had the Prohibition era where alcohol was outlawed, right? Guess what Al Capone and his acolytes did? His coterie of miscreants did. You know, the Chicago outfit. Guess what? We just put it underground, and people still were able to drink, right? He said, I'm not a criminal. He said, I'm just serving the will of the people, right? So we have to be cognizant of these things and have some pragmatic solutions to the issues that we're facing in this country, because the reality is, if you meet people on the right or on the left, what we find is they're simply parroting narratives, but no one's really getting to the solution of how to solve these problems. I believe one of the most important solutions is, number one, we have armed security at schools. My daughter, when I had her enrolled in a private school, you walk in one door, it was like a bank. The door shuts behind you, it locks. You have to hit a button, show your face. Who are you? Why are you here? They look in the database to see if you're listed, right, before you could come inside, right? I think every school needs to be that way. Secondly, I think when we have a conversation about black people in the Second Amendment, we know, unfortunately, many black people, unfortunately, I would argue, subscribe to the nonviolent activism of one Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And I don't have an issue with their activism, because I stated before when I had my video regarding putting some respect on Dr. King's name, that Dr. King advocated nonviolence in a manner in terms of political agitation, not as the philosophy of life. I mean, this was a man who was a husband and he was a father. He understood that his number one job was to protect his family. So he couldn't go around being a pacifist, putting his wife and his children in harm's way. That would be nonsensical. Also, I think it's very important to actually understand that historically and even contemporarily, African Americans have been the victims of violence, vigilante violence, during, of course, the antebellum era, even in the first and the year after Reconstruction, all throughout the Holocaust of enslavement, and state-sanctioned violence, right? We know this came oftentimes through lynchings. We know oftentimes black people would be beaten, thrown in jail, and then the newspapers, back in the day, the turn of the 20th century, there would be two newspapers in the municipality. One of them, a morning newspaper and an evening newspaper. Oftentimes the morning newspaper would state that there's going to be a hanging at 4 o'clock in town square. And then, of course, that evening newspaper had the pictures of it, and then, of course, there would be an editorial stating what happened. Also, we know, as black people here in America, and really globally, we have an external enemy and an internal enemy. Contemporarily, violence has been done to black people through what? Police genocide and, of course, white vigilantism. But we know, unfortunately, the bulk of the physical and violent crime that has happened, that's partaken against black people, takes place in the form of what? Black on black violence. We all know that the master teacher, Dr. Amos Wilson, in his seminal text, Black on Black Violence, the Psychodynamics of Self-Annihilation and Service of White Supremacy, brilliantly elucidates and opines why this is a problem, why it happens, and of course, why it's in the service of white domination. So if you ever get a chance, make sure you check out that book. And last but not least, I think we really have to address the misinformation machine, right? I saw a post in which someone stated, you know, guns should be regulated the same way cars are. And someone stated that, well, when you buy a car, you have a title, you have a tag at each point of sale. But the same thing takes place when you buy a firearm. You have the receipt, right? You have a driver's training. Well, you have gun training. If you want to get your CCW, you have to take a state required 8, 9, 10-hour course. You have to do a written test. You have to do a practical test where you go on the range and show that you actually know how to properly and safely use your firearm. There are health requirements, right? This is even on the questionnaire when you go to purchase the firearm, right? If you have any mental health issues in your background, this comes up on the background check when you go through the federal background check. And then, of course, they talk about liability insurance on each gun. That's really not the case, but I do know many people who have renter's insurance or homeowner's insurance, even car insurance if your vehicles, your gun is stolen or something like that. That would be, you'd be reimbursed through that insurance. And last but not least, I think it's important that we understand that I personally believe that all African Americans should own a firearm, as Malcolm X stated many years ago. The only way that you're able to enslave a group of people is if you take away their ability to protect themselves. And no one's been more unprotected in this country than the black people. Also, I think it's important because it just gives you a fighting chance. You hope for the best, but you prepare for the worst. And it gives us a fighting chance to be able to defend ourselves against individuals who are seeking to do harm in this particularly very callous and horrific manner. As we know, Dylan Roof, when he went to the church in South Carolina, most people aren't going to carry a firearm into a church because it's a place of worship. There's supposed to be some type of sanctity to this religious institution. And so what we're finding is oftentimes mass shooters are going to places where they don't think people will be armed, so they can inflict, in my opinion, mass casualties. So this is just what I had to say, my thoughts on the issue. So let's get the conversation started below, requiring should gun laws be changed. Until next time, you all know what to do. Peace.